The U.S. and China are on a collision course for war. It's definitely coming, so get ready. Or is it? Is it actually on a collision course, or is it a possibility that it could, with multiple off ramps, if we're wise? That's the gist of today's episode, and we have someone really great to check this out, and that is Cyrus Janssen, who is coming to us actually live from Guangzhou, if I'm saying it right, China. Actually, this is live from China. Cyrus, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Danny. Always a pleasure to spend some time with you, and great to chat about this very important topic.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. And I've been on your channel a few times, and we've talked about a number of things. Usually the Russia-Ukraine war, but your area of expertise is absolutely in the China realm. As you lived there for 10 years, you're there again right now. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about kind of what your background is related to your time in China.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I first came to China in 2007, so almost 17 years ago now. I've spent a lot of time here. I've lived 10 years in mainland China. I've had a lot of great experiences here, and then I've been coming back every year since. I've actually relocated out. So I've been coming to China for 17 years now. I've been doing a lot of business here. I've spent a lot of time learning the language, speaking to people. I've traveled to over 50 cities in China itself. So I've had a chance to really see a lot of the country, speak with a lot of people. And again, it's what I do basically every day, is try to see what trends are emerging in geopolitics. I have a very big heart for China. I love the United States, obviously, it's where I'm from, but I love China as well. And I want to see a world where both of us can, these two superpowers can work together, Danny. One of the things I always say on my YouTube channel is when the US and China work together, the entire world's going to win.
Yeah. And when they don't, I think conversely that everybody's going to lose. So let's get that other one off the table. But first of all, we got to look at where it is, and I think that we are not being honest if we don't say that for the most part, the mainstream viewpoints from foreign policy, so-called elite in the United States, is let's lead with military first. Because the view of China is that they're an aggressive expansionist, an aggressive militarily force that we have to counter, because if we don't, war is coming. That's kind of the implication. And as you're going to see in some of the clips we're going to show, some people outright state it. But I just wonder what your view is on how helpful or harmful it is when you have such comments from a U.S. admiral who recently said this.
Samuel Paparo. He is the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Paparo recently spoke to the U.S. media on the sidelines of the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore. He was asked about the U.S. strategy with regard to an escalation in the Taiwan Strait. Paparo said, and I'm quoting here, "I want to turn the Taiwan Strait into an unmanned hellscape using a number of classified capabilities so that I can make their lives utterly miserable for a month, which buys me the time for the rest of everything." The U.S. commander was asked for details, and he replied, I'm quoting further, "I can't tell you what's in it, but it's real and it is deliverable."
So, as you might guess, China didn't take well to that. And there was a former editor for the Global Times, Hu Xijing, I may be saying his name wrong, had a pretty robust and direct response to that claim.
This threat may sound intimidating at first, but it is actually a sign of cowardice. The U.S. military doesn't dare to dispatch troops to combat immediately and only dares to use unmanned systems to respond. Furthermore, the performance of U.S. drones in the Ukrainian battlefield is poor, much worse than Chinese drones. If there is a war of drones, the U.S. military would definitely lose. Chinese drones are leading in materials, batteries, and software. And China has a huge production capacity for drones, with the industrial chain located domestically. This has resulted in Chinese drones not only having excellent performance, but also being very cheap.
Now, Cyrus, a lot of the thinking is we got to be tough with China, because if you don't get tough with China, they're going to walk all over you. So you have comments like this pretty bold and braggadocious claim by the admiral there that we're going to turn that Taiwan Strait into a hellscape. First of all, what does those kinds of boisterous, in-your-face comments do to China? Does it make Chinese back down, or does it have a different impact?
Well, thank you, Danny, for the question. I mean, I think, first of all, it's completely irresponsible for the admiral to speak like this. I mean, what you have to realize as well is, for example, we always look as the United States always looks at even Taiwan as, a close ally, certainly a friend. So, the Taiwan Strait involves Taiwan as well. So even if China is let's say, your enemy or someone that you want to hurt, and by saying, I want to make the Taiwan Strait a hellscape, well, that means that you don't really care about Taiwanese people either. So that's a really irresponsible statement from this U.S. admiral to make. I think that's the first point we need to address. The second thing is that you can see the United States is always, they come out very aggressive with their talk and their actions. And with the reality is we need to be finding a way to, how do we not get to confrontation, right? We both know that the United States and China are both nuclear superpowers. This is something that you don't want to see these two superpowers go head to head. Also, it's the two largest and most powerful militaries in the world. So even if it doesn't go nuclear, even if it was just a different type of battle, that's also a lose-lose situation. So, I would prefer someone to have, more diplomacy and actually understand a little bit more about the situation between China and Taiwan. And most importantly, our responsibility there, because for the past 50 years, we have had a very good relationship with mainland China. We've had a great relationship with them, and that's been based on the one China principle. So, that is one thing that really dictates foreign policy for China around the world. It's also the one thing that has guided the United States and China relationship. And I think this is just really inexperience, speaking from the admiral. This is a guy just coming in, guns a-blazing, cowboy style. Let me just, show you who I'm, this big bad American. But it's a lot of talk, and it's just irresponsible is the way that I would say that.
Well, let's look at it, one of the more fundamental aspects of it, and that is the whole China-Taiwan issue. Now, we always hear China say that they want to reunify with Taiwan. They want to bring it back. They consider it a province of China. Then on the Western side, you hear, no, that Taiwan's never belonged to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They're just making that up. There's no truth to that at all. It's actually an independent country, and they just won it. How would you characterize what is actually the situation between the two?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tough question. This is kind of the whole question for the whole world, and really what really many people have. They want to find the answer to this here, Danny. So what I'm going to explain it is that in the West, we typically do look at Taiwan in a different light. We look at them, we like to separate China and Taiwan. But like I said, I want people to understand this is that when Henry Kissinger first went to China, and he basically set the pathway for Richard Nixon to make his famous visit to China, he met with Zhou Enlai, who was the Chinese premier at the time. And the very first thing that Zhou Enlai sat down with Henry Kissinger and said is that if the United States and China are going to have a relationship, there is one fundamental cornerstone we will base the entire relationship on, and that is the fact that Taiwan is part of China. And for you to have diplomatic relations with us, you need to recognize that what we call the one China principle, that it is in fact part of China. The United States accepted that. Again, that came into acceptance around 1972. So, for over 50 years.
Because one of the things that we've had Chaz Freeman, Ambassador Freeman, on here before, he likes to specify that there was a civil war that started in, more than just 1949, but it kind of culminated then. But there was one China, and then you had the two, whether the communists or the nationalists, and then they went on to the Taiwan island here. But that's what I understand. You correct me if I'm wrong. From the Chinese perspective, it was one China before the Civil War, which included, I think they called it Formosa at the time. And then since that time, the communist, it's almost like a continuation of the Civil War, never actually ended. Is that something close to right?
No, you're correct on that, Danny. And here's the fun fact about this is that actually, according to the Taiwanese constitution, is that they still recognize one China as well. So you actually
Mm,
have both sides respecting the one China policy. It's not that it's not that Taiwan wants to separate and be an independent country. It's the fact that they believe that they govern all of China, right? So they believe that the government sitting in
okay.
Taipei governs all of China. It is one China and that they govern it. Obviously, that the flip side to that is that the government in Beijing believes that they govern all of it. So you basically have two sides wanting the same thing. If you actually look at Chiang Kai-shek, who is the founder of Taiwan, he was one of the biggest supporters for the one China policy. He never wanted to separate, and he never wanted to have his own country. He wanted to have his own government running the entirety of China. Again, the one China. So that's something that many people don't understand. That's by far the most common mistake that most people make when they're discussing China and Taiwan. The simple reality is that both sides believe in one China. So whether you support Taiwan or China, both sides want the same thing. It's just really an argument of, which government is going to be in control. And again, that goes back down to the Civil War.
So then in the current time here, how would you characterize how important to the Chinese people as opposed to the government? Because I think it's pretty clear how important it is to the government. How important is it for the people of China that Taiwan, even theoretically, will unify at some point, as opposed to, they're just going to go their separate ways? Is there any movement in China that goes, it'd be great to have them, but if they go their separate way, it's not that big a deal?
I think that the Chinese, given their education, growing up in China, I mean, if you're a Chinese person, you're growing up here, you have always looked at Taiwan as part of China, and so you have always seen this as kind of it's more similar to a Hong Kong in the sense that it has its own currency, it has its own way of life, it has a different culture. I mean, there's definitely different elements between. I've been to Taiwan many times myself. It's a fantastic place to visit, and what's interesting there is that when you look at, looking at the Chinese people again, I think what they would really like is they as well, they see the people in Taiwan as their brothers. They see them as Chinese, as fellow Chinese. So, I mean, they certainly, would like to see them reunified. But in many ways, it's not, I would say that it's not as big of a deal because they already look at them as part of China. It's not like it's a foreign country and saying, hey, we'd like to eventually acquire this asset. There, in every 1.4 billion Chinese minds, this is already part of China. It's just kind of, do we make it official or not? It's
now. Yeah, I guess now shifting back to the government level, to Beijing side, they obviously are quite intent on never allowing Taiwan to go independent or even de facto independence, because they do, in fact, keep on building up their military. They're getting stronger. That part is actually true. A lot of the things that the U.S. side says, and the military in particular, warning about a rising China and their military capacity is for sure true. And when this new Taiwanese president was inaugurated a couple of weeks back, China took some significant actions to, quote, punish Taiwan. Gary, I'm throwing this a little bit out of order, but if you could bring up the one about the punishing Taiwan, which just a few days ago.
Surrounded on all sides. The largest Chinese military drills in over a year are taking place around Taiwan. And for the first time, a simulation of a full-scale attack. All as punishment, China says, for Taiwan's increasing efforts to pursue independence.
这也是对台独分裂势力谋独行径的有力惩戒，对外部势力干涉挑衅的严重警告。
The drills, taking place for 2 days over May 23rd and 24th, are happening all around Taiwan, smashing through the country's air defense identification zone and barely stopping short of entering Taiwan's own territorial waters, where Taiwan's Coast Guard is already encountering Chinese vessels.
你的行动将严重破坏台海区域和平、稳定及安全。如执意进入我24海里临街区，我方将采取驱离行动。
Beijing says the exercises, called the Joint Sword 2024A drills, will test their military's readiness for war. And, in another first, the drills will target Taiwan's outlying islands, including Jinmen and Matsu.
So when some Western viewers see that, and then they hear those comments from the admiral that we played at the top of the show here, they think, yeah, that's reasonable because, man, they are going to go into war. That's what they're clearly getting ready for. How do you answer that question, or rather, how does it look to you as to whether China is going to war, or that they're preparing if the Taiwan declares independence, but if they don't, there won't be war? That how do you clear that up?
Yeah, well, what's interesting, Danny, is that there was a Financial Times article that was written on May 22nd. So just really the day right before those military drills took place, right? That was May 23rd and 24th. Well, the day before, on May 22nd, Financial Times published an article that says China has a point about Taiwan's new leader. And this was quite an interesting article because what it says is that it talks specifically about William Lai, this new president for Taiwan. And it says that China is right to say that Lai is straying from the path of his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen. And some question the wisdom of taking such a gamble at a time of high tension. This is kind of a very important article that was written by the Financial Times because it's really the first time that we've seen in Western media really acknowledge the fact that, hey, Taiwan itself is really shifting away from this one China policy. They're really coming out with the most pro-independence comments that we've really seen, especially from the top leadership in Taiwan. So this is a big significance. Now, the interesting thing that we also hear from the U.S. government is you will constantly hear, from the West, saying that, we always want to make sure that, for example, the United States, the EU, and the West, they always repeat this line: we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. Well, from either side. So that means that includes the Taiwan side. Well, this clearly, these comments from William Lai is exactly that, right? Is a unilateral change to the status quo from the Taiwanese side. Now, does the United States, do they come out and do they reprimand Taiwan? Do they say, hey, you're not allowed to say that, you are deviating from the status quo that we've all agreed on? Well, of course, there's Western hypocrisy there. The United States doesn't, right? We kind of give them the pass.
In the West, you must be confused.
Right? So what happens is you have this kind of double standard at play, right? And so this is a big thing that I really wanted to bring up in this live stream that I think a lot of people, need to really understand more of that context. Now, as a result, you're going to get a response from China. Okay, so this is the same thing. For example, when you remember last year when Nancy Pelosi, flew to Taiwan, this was not viewed favorably in the terms of Beijing. That you're going to get a response, and it's something that China has to respond to this. They're not going to let a newly elected president in Taiwan come out with by far the most pro-independent statements that we've ever seen, and China's just going to let that go. They're going to make a response. So I think what you're seeing here is with these military drills is certainly China kind of flexing its kind of like a peacock. I'm going to show my feathers a bit here. I want everybody to see, hey, we have the capabilities here. But again, I don't think this is China saying, look, we're just going to overnight, we're going to come in and attack Taiwan.
In light of that, and especially in light of the dates that you just mentioned there, on the 5th of June, I think it was, you had Biden come out to make a comment and said something about the Taiwan Strait issues. Now, you recall prior to watching this here, earlier in Biden's administration, there were 3 separate times where he was point blank asked, would the U.S. defend Taiwan? And he said yes. Now, it was walked back later, but 3 separate times he said yes. On the 5th of June, just about a week or so ago, he added this.
US President Joe Biden has suggested that the US could defend Taiwan if China tried to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Biden made the comments in an interview with Time magazine. Asked if US forces would be deployed to support Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion, Biden said he was, quote, not ruling out using US military force.
Now, it's somewhat less direct before, and it was prefaced by saying if China breaks the status quo, but you see it's going to get kind of murky. If you see the Taiwanese leaders start to stray into independence language more so than it has, and then you see China action, it's a question of which one is the initiator, which one is the response. And of course, that can be different besides depending on which side of the strait you're looking at things. And so that implies that there's a growing risk of a clash that both sides will say the other side started.
Yeah, I mean, like I think a good point you brought up here, Danny, is Joe Biden throughout his presidency has made several gaffes and several comments of, yes, we're going to defend Taiwan. Okay, no, let me walk that back. Actually, we're not. We don't support any changes to the one China policy. You constantly hear the White House staff having to, correct, Biden's comments. So this is actually a very common thing that we've seen from Joe Biden during his presidency, unfortunately. Now, the other thing is I think with, again, going back to this change in the status quo, and once again, the United States does hold a very important peacemaking position here, right? Again, it is supposed to be that, we're opposing any changes, any unilateral changes from both sides. And so, again, if we really are going to adhere to that policy, I think that, we should have, certainly called out Taiwan for these comments that they did. That would have been the most fair thing. We certainly call out China all the time, but we don't see that going both ways. So, again, I think what you're seeing here is it's also a little bit of, I think, the United States also wanting to kind of give face to Taiwan, also saying, look, we're not going to rule that out. It's kind of a nice way to just say, you're not going to say no, you're not going to say yes. It's kind of like, we're not going to rule that out. It's kind of like a maybe. And so you're trying to kind of play, the United States is always kind of walking on the fence, right? We always want to try to stay as balanced as we can. And again, I think what the real situation here, Danny, is as long as the United States does not encourage Taiwan to take that step to make independence, or, for example, if you see what some very hawkish, anti-China hawks are certainly advocating for, is to move away, from this entire one China policy and actually declare Taiwan an independent country. That would be an absolute disaster. And that is certainly what some, very hawkish, Republicans mainly are certainly advocating for.
And look, speaking of hawkish views, here's one I'm going to show you. This is a sample, and there's a bunch more like it I could have shown up. But there's this idea that there's a date in the mind of Xi Jinping where he's going to attack, and only the U.S. can stop them if we fill in the blank. And here's one of them.
I think the danger zone was really 2028 through 2032. She's going to be 79 and 32, may not win the re-election. He wants to accomplish this on his own watch. And we have to do everything in our power to deter this conflict. A war with China would be disastrous, of course, in lives lost, but also to the global economy, perhaps as much as $10 trillion wiped out. And we have to use both military measures and economic measures to extract as much leverage over China as possible to deter them from going after Taiwan.
So on the one hand, he acknowledges if there is a conflict, no matter who starts it or what the context is, God forbid if it should go nuclear, but even just conventional, as you mentioned a second ago, it would be catastrophic for the global economy. There would definitely be no winners and there would be a lot of losers. But then his mentality that he underlies it toward the end of that is that China is coming in. The only thing that can hold them back is a military or strong coercive economic policy to prevent it. How do you view that?
Well, I don't really agree with the idea that of deterrence. I don't really think that comes into play because, number one, it's not like we're dealing, more or less, both the United States and China's militaries, they're both massive superpower military strength. They're both very strong. So it's not like it's not like they're a rising power. Like China's already got a great power. They've already got the world's largest navy. They've already got, like they said, even the drones that we had talked about earlier. I mean, there's no doubt about that. China makes the best drones in the world. A very interesting point. DJI, number one drone company in the world, based in Shenzhen. There's a bill actually going forward on Congress tomorrow to actually ban DJI in the United States, on the grounds of a national security risk. So again, I think that's
packaging that with TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. So and I actually own a DJI drone, that I use for droning, and it's just funny because the technology is very superior. There's just nothing like that in the United States by far. China by far has the best drones. So I think when you're looking at the actual deterrence. I don't think that this is really comes into play as much because, again, this is something that China cannot lose. Like they will go into battle if there was a situation where, the U.S. president comes out and says, hey, we're going to move you guys into independence. Hey, guess what? We're going to be the first major nation to declare independence for Taiwan. You see a situation like that, China's going to battle. They are not going to let that asset go, and they're not going to let it go easily. So it's not about really deterrence. It's more about understanding how do we not even get to that point. Again, which off-road are we going to take? How are we going to, have better diplomacy? How are we going to speak better to China? How are we going to have better meetings? How are we going to respect and make sure that everybody, China, Taiwan, and the United States, that everybody can get along in that Taiwanese Strait? Again, any type of war between the United States and China is going to be a disaster to the world economy. It'll wipe out trillions. We know Taiwan, over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. We've had a U.S. senator come out and say, if there's a war, we should send in U.S. fighter jets and just bomb all these semiconductor facilities just so the Chinese don't get access to it. Well, so what? None of us get access. None of us get access to it either, right? So like we're going to just all go down.
Okay.
And so this is the kind of rhetoric that I'm talking about, and where you unfortunately you do have a lot of people inside the United States foreign policy that they do not have China experience. They do not speak the language. They do not. Most of the people have never even been to China, so they don't know anything. And that's how you can get to a point where you have an admiral who comes out with such brash comments that are completely off the wall, completely inappropriate, and just literally the opposite of what we need to be doing to be avoiding an actual confrontation.
And here's part of the challenge for the U.S. side, on top of all the ones you just mentioned there, and the lack of knowledge or even interest in anything about China to understand how they think, what they want, where there's room for win-win solutions. Too many people don't even look for those things because they aren't interested in win-win. They're just interested in win and lose. We want China to lose and we want us to win. And that's underscored in some of our policies. But here's a competing problem. When you look at the military aspect of and analyze what would happen, forget about why it started, but if once a war between U.S. and China over Taiwan would happen, my analysis, and I've done a lot of detailed study over the years, and in my view, there is no chance that the U.S. could win a conventional fight with China in their front yard, not even their backyard, in their front yard, from however many, 2, 3, 4, 6,000 miles, depending on which bases we're talking about, away from our side. The dearth of missiles that we have, the limitations that we have on supply and the logistic, trails, which would be a nightmare, et cetera. We could lose if we fought in there. There's no possibility to win. When you look at I think it was 2018, 2019, something like that, there was a group of CSIS, I think, analysis that looked at 24 different scenarios of fighting between the U.S. and China over that. And what was discovered, what was reported, let me put that, what was reported was that the U.S. would prevent China from winning, but it would come at a huge cost. 2 aircraft carriers sunk in every scenario, anywhere from 200 to 700 aircraft, U.S. aircraft shot down out of the sky, thousands lost, et cetera. It was different depending on which scenario was run. But when you looked at the details of that was about a month of fighting.
Right.
Ambassador Freeman has said on our show, if you think that China is going to stop after a month, you don't know anything about China. They will
100%.
Never give that up, and they would continue on. We don't have the capacity to continue on to sustain a war like that beyond hardly a month, and most likely China would succeed in that. Now, it appears that there are those in the United States that recognize this, and so they want to answer that not by saying, okay, well, let's have a better foreign policy. Let's look for a different way diplomatically to make sure that there's no war. They want to beef up the military. And you have the Washington Post a couple of days ago, day before yesterday, I think, said, hey, Obama tried to pivot to Asia in 2011, but he messed it up, so we have to do it this time. And the 3 things they said in there, number one, right off the top of the bat, the defense budget has to increase. So we want to, again, lead with military power. The second is that Washington should revive the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, there may be something to that, and I want you to speak on that in a second.
Sure.
And then lastly is that instead of having a diplomatic path to try and make things better, we want to have a more aggressive anti-China diplomatic worldview. So lead with military and end with a coercive diplomacy. Now, I want you to first speak on what you think about that prescription. And then second, and I want to spend the bulk of our time here looking at what is a better policy for both a win-win out of China, so there's no war for Taiwan and no fighting for or dying on the behalf of either China or the United States.
Yeah. A lot of questions to unpack here, Danny. So yeah, no, it's great. It's great. I mean, this is what we're here, and this is why we're talking about it, and it's really important because, again, I want to start off with that Washington Post one because I think this is really important. Is you've got these three specific points that they go through here. I want to talk about this first one is increasing the defense budget. Okay, so that's the first one. Say let's increase this defense budget. Well, let's just go ahead and look at the current wars that we are involved in right now. Right, you've been on my show many times before talking about our efforts in Ukraine. We're sending tens of billions of dollars all the time over to Ukraine. Now, the United States. What's happening in Ukraine does not make the United States military look very good. And let's be honest, when is the last time that the United States military had a substantial victory? Okay, it wasn't in the Korean War, it wasn't in the Vietnam War, it wasn't in the Gulf War, it wasn't in Afghanistan. Right? We spent 20 years, $2 trillion to replace the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan. If you can't find a worse military loss for America, I don't feel very optimistic about our military and the fact that we can, win a conflict, like you said. And so, the reality is now we're supporting another, brutal war in the Middle East that we're seeing between, unfortunately, Israel and Palestine. Gaza is just an absolute hellhole, and it is just an atrocity. Of course, we're spending more billions of dollars there. So, what's also interesting here, Danny, is we know that the military-industrial complex runs the United States. And I think that, Taiwan has quite frankly, been a very good customer. So we actually, we actually like this potential increase in war with China in a very sick way, in the sense that we can sell Taiwan more weapons, and that we need wars around the world to fuel this military-industrial complex. It's disgusting, it's awful, but that unfortunately is the politics of the United States. It's incredibly corrupt. There's so many politicians that have their hands in these weapons manufacturers, and it's really difficult to see. So I think that is, from my perspective as an American citizen, I'm not bullish at all that we could win a war, because I haven't seen us have a military, victory in a very long time. And again, I just think if you look at, if we can't go in and win a war in Afghanistan, how in the world are we going to go in and fight a war against China? I mean, you're out of your mind if you think that we could actually win a conflict with China. Now let's go to the second point. Second point is, to basically we want to invest in Asia, pivot to Asia, and it's by joining this Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, interesting enough, the United States was a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but as soon as Donald Trump was elected in 2016, he took office in 2017. That was one of the first things he did, is he pulled the United States out of that. So this is one of the things that I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage of a democracy. That is the whole point of a democracy, is that you're allowed to change and pivot directions much easier. So, we're going to see, we have an election, obviously, in, 4 or 5 months' time here in the United States. Donald Trump is currently leading the polls to that. There is a good chance that he could become the president, starting in 2025. So if that's the case, is he going to be wanting to be pivot to that? Probably not, because he's the one that actually got the United States out of that in the first place. The other thing is that you see the United States always has a lot of talk, right? As soon as China built the Belt and Road Initiative, okay, China has the BRI. They're going to invest, trillions of dollars around the world. They have over 150 countries around the world have come on board to join the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, Joe Biden comes out and said, what we're going to do? We're going to do the Build Back Better program. It's going to be called, B squared or B cubed. It's the Build Back Better program. And, we make all this hoopla, we make a huge announcement. All of a sudden, 2 years passes, no one's heard another word about it. So what happened to Build Back Better? Wait, the United States, we're going to launch our own trade program that's going to be better than the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, where is it? I don't see this. And, and again, like what you're seeing is that like, this is why, and I've done a lot of videos on my channel breaking down why Africa chose China, why South America chose China, why Southeast Asia chose China. And the difference is that, when United States leaders go to Africa, okay, they give a lecture. And when Chinese leaders goes to Africa, they build a bridge, an airport. There is some type of tangible asset that is transforming the lives of those people there. And this is the difference that people are making. This is why the global South, which actually should be called the global majority, when you're looking at these countries in the South America, in Africa, in
Cyrus,
the Middle East.
Interesting. I actually have some experience that I have some friends that live in Uganda.
Okay.
And a few years back, I went to visit them. We were going to go to a refugee camp on the border with South Sudan. And to get there, we crossed it. We were going through the jungle. Most of it was just kind of these small roads. All of a sudden, there's this, looks like 495 in Washington, huge highway just rolling through, and it was partially under construction. I said, whoa, what is this? Where'd this come from? It's from China. It's from Chinese investment. And, and they, of course, some people say, well, they're exploiting Uganda, but obviously it's a mutually beneficial relationship that they have, because that's a tangible thing on the ground. And I'm like, where's the road that America built? And
yeah,
there wasn't one.
Well, you know what I always say with the United States is there's a classic metaphor that we always hear is, you feed a man, you give a man a fish for a day, it feeds him. You teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for life. And that's a good way of looking at how the U.S. and China really do, how they are in Africa. For example, the United States, we're very good at sending humanitarian aid. We send water, we send meals, we send medical supplies, and, we provide this humanitarian aid in Africa. It's great. It's fantastic. People, hey, here's all of these cases of water. Great. They all get drunk and people need water, right? And it's great. The United States did a good job with that. But where is the next step here? What is the next thing that's going to really provide a certain pathway out? Now all of a sudden you say, well, here's an airport, here's a road, here's a port. Here are some tangible things that now you have a chance to actually start making products. You can drive them on a car down that road. You can put them on an airplane at that airport. And now you can start exporting things and actually start to make some money. You actually can start doing trade with another country like China. And guess what? Now you've got actually a pathway of someone maybe having a better life and actually living a better thing. So again, both of them, I don't want to discredit what the United States has done. We obviously do provide a lot of humanitarian aid around the world, but China, no one else is doing what China's doing. And this is why when you go around to the world and you look at these these countries in the Belt and Road Initiative, why they are so eager to work with China, it's because they get tangible results. And so I think, again, I'm not very bullish on our ability,
okay, so I'm sorry. Given that what you just said about how it's viewed or elsewhere in the global South or global majority, as you put it, then Gary, if you put that Washington Post piece back up there, then it seems to me that the third point there, which is let's contest Beijing's autocratic worldview and basically push back around the world, it's kind of fall on deaf ears, because it doesn't seem like people have any fear of an autocratic China bullying people around the world. I mean, how does that work?
Well, the biggest thing here, and I'm glad you brought up this third point, because I have a very important message I want people to understand. You hear these classic lines from the United States. We need to stand for freedom, sovereignty, democracy, liberal, rules-based order. All of this falls on deaf ears as soon as you get outside the very small bubble of the United States and its allies. Let's review who that really is, right? That's the US, Canada, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Outside of that, everyone else couldn't care less all of what you've just said. Because the biggest issue here that has really extrapolated this, Danny, is the war in Gaza. Okay, what you're seeing here is an absolute just double standard, where you see the United States is supporting, an active genocide in Gaza. You're talking about, hey, we have all of these rules, we have all of these morals, we have this, we have that. Nonsense. This is the United States is just really isolating itself along with Israel on the international stage as each day that this goes by. And, again, we're kind of caught in this really tough situation because obviously we're going to support Israel. You and I have discussed this before. I certainly think that Israel has a right to exist. I'm certainly not anti-Israel, but I'm anti, what Israel's doing in Gaza, and that there needs to be a pathway to statehood. Again, when you look at, the world around, that global south, that global majority, every single country recognizes Palestinian statehood. So again, these are the things where, what? People don't care about the rule of law. They care about international law. And now, just this past week, you had Joe Biden and French President Macron come out and say, hey, we're going to take these assets that, these profits from Russian assets, and we're going to start sending that money to Ukraine. Well, guess what? That actually violates international law. And so this is the problem here, is that, rule of law is really just, it's unfortunately, it only really applies to, the United States and its allies. And most people around the world roll their eyes when they hear that. They can care less about that.
Tell me what most people around the world, what their eyes do when they see this.
What separates Israel, the United States, and other democracies when it comes to incredibly difficult situations like this is our respect for international law and, as appropriate, the laws of war. We know that Israel will take all of the precautions that it can, just as we would. And again, that's what separates us from Hamas.
How is that message? That's what separates us from Hamas.
It's a complete joke. It's a complete joke. And Antony Blinken is just continues to make the worst mistakes. He's just we have made such a colossal mistake and just gone backwards so much. And again, this is Israel as well. Israel and the United States have isolated themselves so much on the international stage. And honestly, it's just complete hypocrisy. There's just no other way to describe this. You cannot justify what the United States, we are 100% enabling this war because we continue to supply the weapons that are doing this carnage and destruction. And this is what's funny, Gary. You look at the United States, they say, okay, you know what we're going to do to help out the people in Palestine? We're going to build this relief pier, right? We're going to build this pier in the sea, and it's going to be kind of a relief pier that we're going to be able to build, and we're going to be able to put some, aid. We're going to be able to send aid, from the sea, to Gaza, through this relief pier. Well, this pier, was constructed so poorly that after just a few days, the whole thing broke apart. Very few materials actually even got through. And, but again, we've getting all these bombs are getting through. And, another situation, we had, what was it? We had, Israel just did this whole raid where they were able to save 4 hostages. And in the process, they slaughtered another 400 people. They bombed another refugee area that was deemed to be a safe zone for innocent Palestinians. Again, Biden, how many times has he said, okay, you are not allowed to go into Rafah. If you go into Rafah, that is a red line. Israel goes right into Rafah. Oh, Biden, what are you going to do? Well, you know what? Israel hasn't crossed my red line yet. Okay, well, what's the red line? Do we have a red line? And then, okay, well, you're not allowed to bomb, these refugee centers. Israel just bombed a refugee center. Well, you know what? That didn't cross our red line either. It's probably just an error there. Sorry about that. Mistakes happen. We're in a war. Okay, so where's the red line? Do we have a red line? And so again, it's just one thing after the other. It's actually baffling to me that you can have Antony Blinken with a straight face, even say these words. I guarantee you in his heart he realizes I'm actually just full of absolute baloney. And there's nobody on the international stage that really, besides probably our allies in Israel, nobody believes what we're talking about. No one.
And here's a compounding problem. If once you lose your credibility among neutral observers, not just your allies, and although it's fraying even among some of those, but especially among the elite, it's still quite strong among the allies, but it's weakening elsewhere. And then now then you have, and let's go back, look back again to the China then also is going, okay, what is in our interest here, and especially when you add in the other big war with the Russia-Ukraine situation, which we talk about a lot. China and Russia working together is also going against our interest. And let's see, there was, obviously there on the screen, you can see some of that's been going on. But the U.S. was worried about Jake Sullivan, in fact, was saying, hey, we got to be watching out because China is doing these bad things and helping Russia. Check this out.
In quite urgent terms, are concerned about what China is doing to fuel Russia's war machine, not giving weapons directly, but providing inputs to Russia's defense industrial base. That is happening. That is something we're concerned about.
And so of course, the way it's projected here is that it's like out of nowhere. And what's wrong with these people? They're working together, so they're nefarious, and we have to be, working against it. But all of these things are together. They aren't separate. Everything has to be taken in context. And again, I mean, we started off talking about Taiwan and China, but you see, in terms of our policies, these things are all interconnected, and they're all kind of going in a bad direction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the United States is at a very vulnerable position right now. I think we have this very important election right now that, as you know very well, Danny, our nation is completely divided right down the middle. I mean, it's very much a divided nation. We have, I think there was I just actually launched a video today on my channel where there's talked about this new poll that had come out where it said 88% of Americans now agree with the statement that NATO member states should be pushing Ukraine to a forced settlement. So you've got 88% of Americans and 94% of Europeans, want to push Ukraine to a forced settlement. Brand new poll that just got released. So
yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
right. I mean, it is a huge poll that really just shows exactly what the nation really wants. And unfortunately, with our leaders, we're not doing that. So again, you have kind of this, this catch-22 where it's like, hey, we live in a liberal democracy. Our politicians are supposed to be representing our values, right? They're supposed to represent the opinions of the people that they serve. But again, it goes down to the special military interest, the military industrial complex, the ability for, us to continue these wars around the world. And I think, when you're criticizing the China and Russia partnership, the reality is that China and Russia have been allies. They've been allies for many years. Obviously, they continue to do business. There's certainly no sanctions between, a Chinese business and a Russian business doing work together. This is kind of inevitable. I mean, that they're going to be continuing their relationship. We know that both nations are members. They're both founding members of the BRICS organization that continues to expand and continues to have a large global influence around the world. We just had the foreign ministers of the BRICS countries. They just had their annual meeting in Russia just 2 days ago. They had come out and spoken on many of the similar things that we're talking about in today's show. And again, one of the big one was the rule of law and the simple fact that they just don't want to be they're going up against the United States right now. And it's very clear, we now live in this very big multipolar world where the world is split right now.
It does. And I want to, in the time we got left here, I want to pivot back to that Washington Post piece, because that's the three things. It's kind of conventional wisdom right now is in the United States, at least among the foreign policy elitists, that everything has got to be coercive against China, and that's going to solve everything. I think it's pretty clear based on the things we've been talking about here, that's going to exacerbate things. It's not going to make anything better. So the question is, what will make things better? And what would you advocate that could make things going from a provocative and a possible explosive relationship to something that's at least stable and mutually beneficial?
Well, I think that I think we got to go back to that original statement that I said, is that you always hear the United States and our allies say things like, we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. So if the United States, if they really are interested in having peace in the Taiwanese Strait, they really need to sit down with both sides, and they need to start criticizing both sides. Again, like I said, we criticize China all the time. Well, you know what? If Taiwan's going to come out with a more independent stance, the United States needs to say, look, you can't go independent. This is what our whole relationship is based on. It's the status quo. It's the simple fact that, again, we have the one China policy, and we're going to make sure that we keep this for the foreseeable future. Now, in terms of reunification, yes, it is China's goal to have a peaceful reunification. I am 100% against the belief that in 2025 and 2027 and 2028, China is just gonna, they have a date. I don't believe China has a date. They don't have a date where they're going to attack, because here's the other thing I want to get in on this show, Danny, is that China, they are not wanting to attack Taiwan. You got to remember, 1.4 billion people. You asked earlier in the show, what do the average Chinese people think? Well, they all love Taiwan. This is, they look at Taiwan as almost kind of the crown jewel of China in a sense. I mean, it's got a very prosperous island. They look at that island, full of their brothers and sisters that are living over there. So it's not like Chinese people want to see, a huge military operation start and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese people lose their life, and then also mainland Chinese people losing their life. That's a lose-lose. If you talk to Chinese people here, here on the ground in China, one of the things that they are most all about is they're very much anti-war. They're very much about living with peace. I was in a taxi last night and I was chatting with my driver. I said, "Hey, I'm from America. What do you think?" I said, what does the average Chinese think about American? And she goes, I'm just an average taxi driver. I don't understand politics. I don't know these things. But you know what I do know? I know that I just want peace. Just the whole world. I don't want any war. That's the world that I want to live in. And I was like, wow, I wish I recorded that. That would have been a really good for my YouTube channel, just to have that insight. But that's really that is something that you hear very much. I mean, Chinese people are anti-war. When you hear that, hey, this China military is this huge aggressor, when's the last time China was in a military conflict?
Exactly what I was literally just about to ask you. When was the last time that China invaded India? I know they do have some history, but how long has it been? Do you know?
Well, it's been 1979. They were involved in the Vietnam War, they were involved in Vietnam, and there was some. I think it was 1979. They had invaded Vietnam at some point, but it's been well over 40 years. So it's not like China is an expansionist country. They're not trying to expand their territory. They're not trying to install their form of government.
Correct me if I'm wrong, even that Vietnamese war was a limited objective incursion, which then they returned back to their side. It was pretty short, isn't that right?
It was, exactly. So, I mean, it's not like it was this huge battle. And, we see things like, for example, that there's been some border skirmishes between India and China, and some people have been killed. I mean, you're not going to say that that's like a military conquest, or that's China trying to expand their borders. I mean, that's what happens. You've got another two superpowers that, they're having some border issues. Okay. It's a pretty minor thing in reality, and they're going to sort that through. And actually, you've seen India and China's government say, hey, we're going to work on these. We're going to make these improvements. We recognize there's a problem. Let's work through this. Let's figure this out, and let's move to the next step here. So, you're not going to see China as this aggressor. I am not worried by China, growing their military. Why? Because that's what superpowers do, right? If you are the second largest, GDP in the world, if you are this military, if you're a superpower, it's in your interest to develop a military. And the reality is, as well as, you look at the amount of U.S. military bases surrounding China, they want to have protection as well. Always put the shoe on the other foot. If the United States was located where China is, and you had all of these Chinese naval and our Air Force bases surrounded, that the United States will be building up a military as well. So I think it's just really important for us to have cooler heads need to prevail, Danny. We need to have smart people that really understand, these complex situations. One of the voices that I really like and that I would really recommend is Ryan Haas, who he was based there in Washington, D.C. with you. I believe he's now been promoted to the director of the Brookings Institute. Ryan Haas and I had a chance to speak at a Vanderbilt University in 2021. We both had given a keynote speech there talking about COVID. But when I spoke with him, I said, wow, this is a man that served under President Obama's administration. He worked inside the U.S. Embassy, obviously speaks Chinese. He's had a tremendous amount of experience on the ground in China. You get a guy like that and you talk to him, you immediately, you start saying, wow, this is some intelligent American diplomats that actually understand what they're talking about and actually have that experience. And you contrast that with those comments from that admiral, you've got a night and day. So we have some people there. There's another author that I want people to understand is Jessica Chen Weiss. She's just been promoted to a new position that she just announced on Twitter. I believe she's working at a new facility that she's going to be a professor at. She's written some very great objective pieces on, the Washington Post, New York Times, talking specifically about Taiwan and China. So, there are some good voices here in the United States that are advocating. They're just few and far between because, unfortunately, rational thinking that makes sense, that's not going to get the clicks. And, you have...
I'm going to get the clicks or the dollars, the defense dollars, but that's a separate issue.
Exactly.
Cyrus, I want to ask you one other question. And before I do, I just want to make a point here to tell all of our viewers, there's a wealth of information on Cyrus's YouTube channel. Be sure to go visit that. You see Gary put that up on the screen right there. I go there to watch a lot of stuff. Sometimes I actually appear on his channel. Definitely go and check this up. Lots of great stuff. And I'm guessing that there's going to be more stuff while you're out there in China right now that pops up here. So I'll be looking back for that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the last part here, so you just talked about one of the things we could do, which is to just actually have a one China policy again and actually apply it equally across both sides of the strait. But what could the U.S. do in their bilateral relations with China? Because look, there are some legit issues with stealing intellectual property, with trade issues, lots of disputes going on there, et cetera. So nobody's clean in this situation here. But what can the U.S. and China do bilaterally to lower tensions and increase cooperation?
Well, what I'd like to see is I'd really would like to see some of these more educated, foreign policy experts in the United States be actually elevated to higher levels in the government and actually on this advisory boards that are really having direct access to the president and our government officials that are, making these visits to China and Taiwan and really, set up. I would also like to see, a peace dialogue set up. I would love to see the United States and Taiwan and Chinese leaders, all meet together, and really, have an opportunity to say, look, I think that war is not in the interest of anybody here. So let's really come up with this framework that we are going to, put forth. But again, I'm going to end it on this comment here is I think the chances of war with China, that ball is in the United States court. It really depends on what we want to do. For example, if we recognize the one China policy, we move away from all of these verbal gaffes from the president. We really respect the one China policy that has guided our relationship for the past 50 years. And we also adhere to the policy that we're going to call out both sides, if there's any type of unilateral shift away from that. And if we stay committed to that, I think we're going to be good. I think that there's really not that much chance of a tension or conflict. I really think that the chances of us going to war are actually much lower than it appears. And that also comes from having visited Taiwan many times before. And what's interesting? You go to Taiwan, you talk to local Taiwanese people, they're not worried. They're doing their normal life. They love life. It's a great place. Every day goes by and it's like, hey, we've been living in for 40, 50 years of everybody telling us that China's going to invade at any second. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Let's just kind of keep going on with our day. Like we've been hearing that for decades upon decades. But again, if the United States decides to go off script and say, you know what, we're going to support this William Lai. If he says these really comments about independence, guess what? You know what? Why don't we shift away from this? Why don't we go ahead and declare Taiwan independent? If that, again, this is why I say the ball's in the U.S. court, because it really depends on how the United States wants to handle this. If they respect the principles that have guided this relationship so far, I think we're going to be okay. But if we choose to shift, China will be ready, and this is definitely a fight that they will not give up on.
Yeah, I agree with that. China's not benign. I mean, they can and will strike, and I think they have the capacity to succeed militarily if their red line is crossed and if we go across it. So we need to make sure that we don't, for everyone's benefit, primarily ours even. Thanks so much for coming on today, Cyrus. This has been an incredibly helpful and educational session today, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, thank you so much. I want to thank you everybody for spending time with us here, and always a pleasure, Danny. We'll see you soon.
Look forward to seeing you soon too. And if you guys don't remember from yesterday, we got a triple header for you today. This is just episode number 1. We have also coming up something on Biden and NATO with Jacques Bau, Colonel Jacques Bau from Switzerland. That he's always one of our favorite because he's so knowledgeable about all the things that are going on both sides of that line over there. And then later on, we also have Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, that's going to be on this afternoon. So not going to want to miss those. Be sure and keep up on our channel here, and you'll see the times when they're listed on there. The next one is going to be at 11 a.m. with Colonel Jacques Bau. Be sure to join us there, and we'll see you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.